Hey everyone, I hope you're having a good time on your trip. I'm going to go ahead and forewarn everybody. I'm going to try to do this video in one take, so if I mess up a couple times, just bear with me. I'm going to try not to edit it or anything, so it's just going to go all the way through. John asked me to do a video for everyone, and he asked me to do it because I'm not sure if everyone knew, but I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease back in 2010, which actually caused me to get very sick, and eventually my kidneys shut down, and it led to me getting a transplant about a year and a half later in 2012. And so I'm just going to go over my story a little bit, and try to relate that to the lesson that he's going to go over. And the lesson that he's going to go over, the Bible verse that he's going to go over, is Romans 8. I think it's verse number 37. And what that talks about is just through Christ, we're able to conquer all things. We're able to overcome any hardship or obstacle in our lives through Christ. And so, when I was first diagnosed with Goodpasture syndrome, what that is it's an autoimmune disease that affects your kidneys and your lungs. And I was fortunate enough to where it did not permanently damage my lungs, but it did shut down my kidneys all the way. While going through the story and looking back, there are things that I didn't necessarily realize then that I realize now that God had his hand in. And one of the first instances was when I was first put into the hospital in Columbus. There were only three, I think, testing labs all over the entire United States that tested for the specific disease that I was diagnosed with. And so I think it was maybe the fourth or fifth day that I was in the hospital in Columbus that the doctor just happened to look down at the folder. I think it was on a Friday before he was about to go home for the weekend. He looked at the folder and it showed, I think it was my file, and it showed him the disease that I was diagnosed with. And so if he would not have looked at that, it would have been Monday most likely until he would have picked that folder up, and it would have been almost 3 days later until they'd have diagnosed me with this disease. And with the disease I was diagnosed with, it was very important that treatment was started immediately once they figured out what was wrong. That meant getting on, putting a port in my chest, and doing dialysis for multiple hours, 3 times a week, and doing plasmapheresis treatments, which were hooking you up to another machine and through the tubes in your chest, and it circulated the blood in your plasma, or the plasma in your blood, to remove the bad antibodies and replace it with clean and fresh plasma. And so, just little things like that, looking back, it just shows, how God had his hand in it. He told the doctor to, it nudged him somehow to, want to take a look at that file. And so when I was diagnosed with that, and I was in the hospital in Columbus for 6 days, they actually transferred me up to Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was because they had a lot more experience, or at least a little bit more experience, dealing with this type of autoimmune disease. And the reason I say a little bit of experience is because it is a very rare disease. And so it's another blessing in itself, because my doctor in Columbus said that if it was even his child, he would want them going up to Emory. And so, just to have someone who had their honest opinion to send me up to the best doctors to take care of me was another blessing. And the interesting thing about going up to Atlanta was I was supposed to go on the 6th floor of the hospital, but all the rooms were full. And so through a couple of different connections through my dad's work, they were able to get me into the 7th floor, which is actually for the post kidney and liver transplant patients. And so since I had obviously not had a kidney transplant, my kidneys were actually failing at that point. I was lucky to get on that floor. And looking back, that was such a big deal because once I actually ended up getting well, or well enough where they got rid of those antibodies in my blood, and they told me that I no longer had that disease in my system, and my kidneys were still shut down, but I was still eligible to get on the transplant list and have people to go through testing for me. That opened up a door as far as a nurse that I met on the 7th floor. And to fast forward a little bit, she was actually the one who ended up giving me my transplant, or donating her kidney so that I would be able to have a transplant. I'm going to back up just a little bit though, because what was really crazy about that is because I was supposed to be on the 6th floor, I would have never met her. Her name's Allison Batson, and it just so turns out because I was on the 7th floor that I was able to meet her and build a relationship with her while I was in the hospital, because I was in Columbus for a week and in Atlanta at Emory University Hospital for 6 weeks. So a total of 7 weeks in the hospital. And so, all the nurses and doctors, we knew each other on obviously a first name basis because of spending so much time there. But, whenever I do this and I tell this story to medical students, usually once a year at Emory, I talk about how our relationship with Allison was built, and that was based on just the fact that she came in one day because she heard that I was in there, and she has 4 kids that are all around my age, and so she just wanted to come in and say hello. And so we'd had some gift baskets sent in with food, and so we offered her some of the foods that I couldn't eat, and so she'd always come down just to say hello. And after I ended up getting out of the hospital and going back to Columbus, where I'm originally from, like I said, I was cleared to actually get on the transplant list and to start trying to find someone who would, if I had a living donor, to be able to donate to me. But nobody was either a match or they didn't pass the testing. And so Allison, whenever I went up to, I think it was a visit in the next 2 months or so after I got out of the hospital, she asked how testing was going, and I told her unfortunately no one was passing the tests. Even though I had a couple people offer to do so, they weren't going anywhere. And incredibly, she looked at me and said she had prayed about it. She had talked to her family about it, and she even tells me that one night when she was praying about it, she just felt like there was this presence and this touch on her shoulder that just said, I really want you to do this, and that it's okay for you to go through with it. And she felt like that was God telling her that it was her calling to pretty much be my hero and to save my life. She told me that day that that's what spoke to her, and so she ended up telling me she was going to go through testing for me. And since she worked at Emory University Hospital, she actually went through testing in, I want to say it was only just a couple of weeks, because usually whenever anyone else does it, they have a full-time job, and they're usually have a job away from the hospital, and so it takes them months to go through testing, whereas it took her, I think, only a couple of weeks, and she passed through it in a couple of weeks. And so she's definitely an angel sent for me because of what she did for me. And looking back, and even at the time, but looking back, I can just see how so many things fell into place with so many different obstacles that I had to go through, and all of the tough times that not only I went through, but my family went through, going through this with me, that she was able to help me through all of that with her belief and following in Christ. And so I just wanted to share that story with you, and just to say that no matter what trials or tribulations, challenges you're going through in life, that even at the time, if you don't know it, that God is always with you. And He was with me through the beginning, and He was with me through all the way through my sickness and to when I got my transplant, and even now. And so thank you for hearing my message, and I hope y'all have a great time.